the long wait is over for French politics junkies. 4 days after the appointment of a new French prime minister, the first cabinet unveiled since the re-election of centrist Emmanuel Macron as president, answering to new PM Elisabeth Borne, a mix of familiar faces and new ones. Going over the new roster is France 24 politics editor Marc Perelman. Marc, is this what we were sold?
In a way, yes, because half of the ministers were already ministers under the previous government. Some have moved, or some have been promoted, some have been demoted, but half of them are already there, especially heavyweights, like the economy minister Bruno Le Maire, the interior minister Gérald Darmanin, the justice minister Éric Dupond-Moretti, minister who's been promoted, Sebastien Lecornu, becomes the defense minister. He was the overseas territory minister until now. The new face, clearly, there are two new faces in important positions. The new foreign minister, Catherine Colonna, a seasoned diplomat. She was, or she is still France's ambassador to the United Kingdom. She was for 9 years, a record, the spokesperson for then President Jacques Chirac between 1995 2004. The other, and this is really the surprise of the government, is the new education minister, historian Pape Ndiaye. He is currently the head of a museum, a recently created museum on the history of immigration. He's a specialist of minorities, both here in France and in the United States. This is a very, very risky gamble because being education minister in France is probably one of the toughest positions. Many ministers have vowed that they would change the education in France. Very few have succeeded. So it will be a very, very tall order for Pape Ndiaye, but this is clearly an interesting appointment.
An interesting appointment. Is there the sense that this is the team Emmanuel Macron wants to keep? Because just a reminder to our viewers, we have legislative elections coming up. If Macron wins, is this the team he wants to keep?
Well, this is the draft, essentially. He hopes the draft will be maintained after those elections, but things could change. Number one, his party could lose the election. This means this cabinet will only stay for a few weeks because there'll be a new prime minister. This is clearly not what we're looking at when we look at the polls, but there could be changes also within his government. Let's say, for instance, the prime minister, Elisabeth Borne, she's running for office for the first time, a fairly easy, quote-unquote, constituency, but if she loses, she has to leave. And the same goes for the ministers, those who will be running for election or re-election. They need essentially to win to be able to stay in government. So there could be changes. First of all, there could be more ministers added, maybe junior ministers after the legislative elections. Some ministers might be in a difficult position. I mean, the justice minister, let's take him for example, Éric Dupond-Moretti.
Yeah, he's running in those legislative elections.
No, he's not running.
He's not running.
But he's been said to be on his way out because he has a very tense relationship with the magistrate. The unions have immediately, vividly reacted, negatively reacted to his reappointment, and he also could face a trial. So some are saying maybe it's a trial balloon to see if he can essentially avoid controversy, avoid legal trouble, and stay in his position. So Emmanuel Macron took his time to appoint the prime minister, took his time to appoint the government, and he's clearly going to look at the outcome of the legislative election. First, if he wins a strong and coherent majority, that's what he's hoping for, and then to see how his ministers will perform in their first few days. And eventually he can always say, you know, new elections, new times, I might shuffle this new team around, but obviously the core will remain for at least several months, if not several years.
We can, I believe, cross over to the French presidential palace. France 24's James André is there. James, it's kind of a ritual, isn't it? We do not have James André. We'll try to cross over to him as soon as we can and ask him about the optics of what a cabinet nomination is like in France. You mentioned Éric Dupond-Moretti. There's also the Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, who
remains.
Who remains. He's a polarizing figure because he comes from the hard right, and also because he'd had cases in which he was cleared of sexual abuse. Those two, if those are the familiar faces that are remaining in government, is that then a disclaimer to Emmanuel Macron's claim that he would look left a little bit when it comes to courting voters for those legislative elections?
Yes and no, but yes, those were, first of all, the two ministers that were cited. The protocol order was Bruno Le Maire, the economy minister, because obviously there's a willingness to show that there's continuity, because Emmanuel Macron considers that when you look at the economy, despite COVID, we need to figure out what will happen with the consequences of the war in Ukraine. But this has been a success because growth is back, unemployment is at a record low. So Bruno Le Maire stays. The Interior Minister, it's the law and order minister, if you will. And Emmanuel Macron believes that it's important to show continuity. That being said, one of the ministers who was promoted is Olivier Dussopt, who was a junior minister in charge of the budget. He's now in charge of labor. And Pape Ndiaye, the historian, whom we mentioned, obviously he's not a politician, but he comes, let's say, from the left, and he's going to be at the helm of the education minister. So it's always a mix between the left and the right, and Emmanuel Macron can claim that he's picking ministers from the left and from the right. Let's not forget that his prime minister, Elisabeth Borne, she was never a member of the Socialist Party, but she always worked until she was appointed minister by Emmanuel Macron with left-leaning officials, and so she is more towards the left. So it's a fine balancing act, and it could be readjusted depending on the results of the legislative election. Let's say if the left performs very well, Emmanuel Macron might be tempted, like he did between the two rounds of the presidential election, to veer a little bit more towards the left, because he feels that he's free from old-side politics and that he can pick left and right wherever he wants.
All right, we can cross to James André at the French presidential palace. James, you had front row seats to that just a short while ago, to the naming of a cabinet. It's quite a ritual, because this is a country where everybody's politics mad all week long because the announcement was delayed. We're focusing on it. And the ritual consists of the Secretary General of the presidency, who comes out alone and reads a piece of paper.
Exactly. He comes out alone and reads a piece of paper. So in this instance, it was Alexis Kohler, who is a long-time co-worker of Emmanuel Macron. They've been working together ever since the very beginning of Emmanuel Macron's bid to become the president of France. That was back in 2017 and before, when he was an economy minister. But also he indeed has been reconducted as the Secretary General of the Elysee after Emmanuel Macron was re-elected just 4 weeks ago. But anyway, Alexis Kohler comes out on his own, reads that piece of paper. Now, that actually is because the French Constitution states in its Article 8 and 9 that it is the Secretary, that it is the President of France who chooses the minister upon the council of the Prime Minister. That is how the ritual works, and this is why it is the Secretary General of the Elysee's job, and that's the Chief of Staff, if you will, job to come out and give these names. Now, there was a part of the staff of the Elysee that was out in the courtyard of the building, and also, obviously, the press that was assembled to get that list of names. Now, the list itself was 28 names. That's 2 less than in the previous government. It was completely gender equal, with 14 names, 14 men, 14 women. And also, indeed, it was designed to implement the politics of the president of France, of Emmanuel Macron. That's what we were told by one of the members of the staff who spoke to the press for a few minutes after these names were given out, explaining that, indeed, one of the objectives was indeed to put sovereignty back at the center of the political game here in France, to show that there is a willingness to reclaim sovereignty after the COVID crisis and also amidst the Ukraine crisis, because two ministries have changed their names. For example, the Economy Ministry is now also the Ministry of Industrial Sovereignty, and also the Agricultural Ministry, for example, has become the Ministry also of Agriculture and Food Sovereignty. So strong messages that have been sent there. And also, and when it comes to statistics, well, out of 28 new appointed ministers, 12 are new faces that weren't ministers in the previous government. So indeed, change and continuity, as indeed Marc Perelman was just saying there, with some of the main ministries that are being kept in place. We were told, for example, that when it comes to Dupond-Moretti, who is the Justice Minister, and Gérald Darmanin, who is the Interior Minister, well, there is a wide police and justice reform which is ongoing, and that the President wants that to carry on and to be held by the same people that were taking care of it.
James, André reporting live from outside the French presidential palace. Many thanks for that update. Some promoted, some demoted. Olivier Véran, who was health minister during the COVID crisis.
Yes, he is now going to be junior minister in charge of relations with the parliament. Yes, some have been demoted, some have left, including Julien de Normandie, who was the agriculture minister, very close to Emmanuel Macron, talked about as a potential prime minister. He said, it's a personal decision. I want to spend more time with my family. Politicians are human beings after all.
It's true. Many thanks, Marc Perelman.